Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're doing something kind of morbid but absolutely fascinating. We are conducting a corporate autopsy, exploring exactly how a company is legally dismantled under Sri Lanka's Companies Act No. 7 of 2007. Whether you're a law student, a business owner, or just someone interested in corporate machinery, understanding how a company navigates its final days is incredibly important. So get comfortable, because we're going to break down this complex legal framework step by step.
Before we get into the weeds, here's a little insider secret for you. If you look at past legal assessments on this topic, something really striking jumps out. A massive 35% of the legal scrutiny focuses entirely on the intense battle between members and creditors during liquidation. Another 30% zeroes in on court-ordered winding up. That data tells us exactly where the legal risks and the most critical mechanics actually lie. And we're going to master all of that today.
Here is our game plan for today. We'll start with the anatomy of corporate death, run through the 3 liquidation paths, look at forced exits via court orders, choosing to close voluntarily, the timing and penalties involved, and finally, the crucial showdown of members versus creditors.
All right, part 1. The anatomy of corporate death.
The first thing we need to get straight is that liquidation is not just turning off the lights, locking the office doors, and walking away. It is a highly regulated, totally systematic dismantling. The entire process is designed to enforce absolute fairness. The law wants to ensure that every single asset is realized, every liability is settled, and any leftover funds are distributed with total transparency. It's the ultimate form of corporate accountability at the end of the line.
Moving on to part 2, the 3 liquidation paths. So how does a company actually initiate this termination? Every corporate autopsy begins by identifying the specific legal trigger. Under the Companies Act, we have to look at Section 267 to see the option.
There are basically 3 distinct doors a company can walk through. Door number 1 is a compulsory forced exit initiated by the court. Door number 2 is a voluntary choice made internally. And door 3 is a bit of a hybrid. It starts out voluntarily, but ends up subject to the strict supervision of the court.
Let's dive into part 3, forced exit through court orders.
You're probably wondering what exactly has to go wrong for a judge to step in and involuntarily shut a business down. Well, it doesn't just happen on a whim. The law sets out some very severe, specific triggers under Section 270.
Let's run through these statutory grounds. If a company fails to commence business within a year of incorporating, or it just suspends operations for a whole year, bam, the court can act. If the number of members drops below the legal minimum, or functioning directors simply vanish into thin air, the court intervenes. But you know what the most common trigger is? Commercial insolvency. Literally just the sheer inability to pay debts. And finally, there's a fascinating catch-all, just and equitable grounds. This means if management is completely deadlocked or there is serious oppression happening behind the scenes, the court will absolutely, mercilessly pull the plug to prevent any further damage.
That brings us to part 4, choosing to close voluntarily.
Companies aren't always dragged kicking and screaming to their demise, right? Sometimes they proactively write their own final chapter. To understand how a company gracefully, or sometimes desperately, bows out on its own terms, we turn to Section 319.
A company can essentially die of natural causes if a predetermined time frame fixed in its Articles of Association just runs out. Alternatively, the shareholders can simply get together and pass a special resolution to wind things up. Or in a much more distressed scenario, they can pull their own life support by passing a resolution explicitly admitting that crushing liabilities make business survival literally impossible. All right, part 5, timing, penalties, and supervision.
Before we get to the climax of this explainer, we really need to understand why the exact timing of this closure carries massive legal and financial stakes. Why is the commencement time under Section 321 so incredibly critical? Because in corporate law, the literal second a resolution is passed, the company's reality changes forever. The rules of the game instantly flip.
Section 321 dictates that commencement is the exact moment the special resolution is passed. Why does that matter?
because any unauthorized share transaction or property transfer after that exact moment is entirely voided. It instantly freezes the company's assets to protect creditors. Plus, it marks the exact effective start date for the liquidator's powers, giving them immediate and unquestioned control over the whole shebang.
And if you try to hide this process, the law bites back hard. Section 320 requires notice of the voluntary resolution to be published in the Gazette and daily newspapers within 14 days. Failing to publicly announce this closure slaps the company with fines up to 100,000 Sri Lankan rupees. And the officers in default, which absolutely includes the liquidator, face personal fines up to 50,000 rupees. The law demands total, uncompromising transparency.
Now, what happens if things get a bit messy during a voluntary closure? That brings us to our third mode, court supervision. Sometimes creditors or shareholders will petition the court to essentially babysit a voluntary winding up. The voluntary resolution isn't thrown out, but judicial oversight is added just to monitor the liquidator's conduct and ensure absolutely no one is playing dirty with the remaining assets.
Which leads us to the climax, Part 6, Members versus Creditors. Remember that 35% exam weightage we talked about earlier? This is it. When a company decides to wind up voluntarily, absolutely everything hinges on one single foundational difference: solvency. Does the dying company actually have enough money left to pay what it owes in full, or is it insolvent and coming up short?
It's fascinating to see how the power shifts depending on the situation. In a member's voluntary winding up, the company is solvent because everyone is going to get paid. The directors make a formal statutory declaration of solvency. The shareholders get to retain control, and they appoint the liquidator themselves. But if the company is insolvent, boom, it triggers a creditor's voluntary winding up. There is no declaration of solvency, and power forcefully shifts away from the shareholders. The creditors grab the wheel, they nominate the liquidator, and primary control rests squarely in their hands. The law steps up to protect the people who stand to lose money.
And here is a pro tip that constantly catches people off guard. These members and creditors processes aren't entirely new, separate doors. They are literally just two very different flavors of a voluntary exit. Never confuse them with a court-ordered compulsory winding up.
So, as we wrap up, it's pretty clear that this is a remarkably robust legal machine. Mastering this framework isn't just an academic exercise, it's about real-world corporate accountability. It's about ensuring protection for both creditors and shareholders when the money inevitably runs dry.
Understanding all these legal mechanics leaves us with one critical, lingering thought. Whether a business closes by choice or by force, the law dictates exactly who holds the keys at the end. So ask yourself, if a corporate entity you are involved with faced the end today, who would truly be in control of its final days? You, your creditors, or the courts? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.